Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight concerns the drought in California. Local and federal agencies have begun imposing water restrictions in California as it faces its worst drought in decades. With the state's reservoirs at 50%, Governor Gavin Newsom has declared a drought emergency in 41 of the 58 counties. The water level of Lake Oroville in Northern California has decreased significantly, and its hydropower plant may be idle for the first time. This places additional strain on the state's already troubled electric grid. Newsom blamed climate change for the catastrophic situation. The lack of water and rise in temperatures have scientists worried about California's readiness plan for the upcoming wildfire season. CAL FIRE, the state's firefighting agency, has hired 1,400 new firefighters and added new helicopters and fire engines to its fleet in preparation. Thousands of the fire crew consist of male, female, and teenage inmates. The inmates signed on to the fire crew with a chance to have their criminal record expunged after 2 weeks of fire training. Paid $2.90, the crew works around the clock in hopes of having a fresh start, all of which is dependent on the verdict of a judge. 2 United States Senate committees released a joint report yesterday. They detailed intelligence and security failures on the day of January 6th attack on the Capitol. The document said that the entities responsible for securing and protecting the Capitol were not prepared. This was despite being aware of the potential threat of violence that day. In February, the Senate Homeland Security and Rules Committees launched a bipartisan investigation into the attack. Testimonies were given by the U.S. Capitol Police, as well as other law enforcement agencies such as the Defense Department and the Department of Homeland Security. Thousands of documents and written statements were reviewed. The committee said that the FBI and DHS failed to issue a threat assessment despite online calls of violence on January 6th. Capitol Police intelligence was also called off for not sharing the threat information with its officers. In addition, the committees blamed the Capitol security team for delaying assistance calls to the National Guard. Even with the call for assistance, the process resulted in a 4-hour delay in getting help. In their defense, Capitol Police said the intelligence did not reveal that the large-scale demonstration would turn into an attack. The committees recommended joint exercises to improve cooperation and coordination between all law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The United Nations Court rejected an appeal by Ratko Mladic against his genocide conviction for war crimes in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Butcher of Bosnia, as he has been called, was found guilty of leading the massacre of more than 8,000 Muslim men and boys in Srebrenica in July 1995. The massacre was the worst in European history since World War II. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, said his crimes were the culmination of hatred for political gain. The 79-year-old former general is the last major figure to face justice in the genocide in Bosnia. Mladic was in hiding since 1995. He hid for 16 years until he was caught in northern Serbia. U.S. President Joe Biden said in a statement that the U.S. has helped lead the effort to end atrocities in Bosnia-Herzegovina in the 1990s. He acknowledged the tireless work and dedication of the United Nations tribunals over the last 2 decades to make this judgment possible. In related news, the man who killed 51 Muslim worshippers in Christchurch, New Zealand 2 years ago, said he was inspired by Serb leaders like Mladic. A moment of silence was observed on Monday in Canada's Parliament to honor 4 members of a Muslim family killed in an Islamophobic attack. The family of 5 was intentionally hit by the driver of a pickup truck at an intersection in London, Ontario. The victims included 3 generations of the same family. A young boy is still in the hospital with serious injuries. but is expected to recover. London police said they believe the victims were targeted because of their Islamic faith. Later tonight in our show, we will be discussing the issue of Islamophobia and the statement of Canadian Premier. So please keep watching Muslim Network News. The leader of the militant group Boko Haram, Abu Bakr Sheku, has been killed. He died after detonating an explosive device while being pursued by ISIS fighters. ISIS, the terrorist group, has attacked his base in northeast Nigeria on orders from their leadership. ISIS has accused Boko Haram for terrorizing people by attacking innocent civilians. Sheku was responsible for the abduction of 300 female students in 2014. Nigerian and international security services have been trying to capture him for 10 years. The incident points to the growing power of Daesh, or ISIS, in Africa. The Indian double mutant COVID variant has now reached 60 countries. Its effects can include hearing impairment and severe stomach pains. It may also cause blood clots leading to gangrene. These symptoms are not typically seen in COVID patients. In England and Scotland, early evidence suggests that the strain carries a higher risk of hospitalization. It is also forcing the United Kingdom to reconsider its plans for reopening later this month. Colombians have been protesting police corruption and violence. Over 43 protesters have been killed by the police, and there have been 22 reports of sexual violence since the statewide protest began. Citizens have reported over 3,000 cases of police brutality. The United States is the top donor to the Colombian government. In 2020, United States sent $448 million. On June 5th, Colombians and Palestinians came to Washington, D.C. to stand in solidarity with protesters in Colombia. They demanded the U.S. stop sending money to the Colombian government. 132 Burkinabe people have been killed in the West African country of Burkina Faso. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. The United Nations expressed outrage at the mass killings, which occurred late Friday night. Tensions have increased in the region with the presence of French troops. There are about 5,000 French soldiers permanently headquartered in Chad. French military operations extend to 5 former colonies, including Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. Resistance to the French is strengthened by armed groups who fled the fall of Libya's Gaddafi. French media, on the other hand, blame the insurgents for the violence. A Bosnian woman finally has justice after seeking it for 20 years. Her garden is now finally free for her to enjoy. More details on this in a report by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
It was Fata Orlovic's garden. Her story is the story of Bosnia. Her husband and 22 relatives were murdered by Serbs in Srebrenica in 1995. She and her 7 children were expelled from their property. They lived as refugees in different countries for 5 years. When Feta came back in 2020, she found an Orthodox church standing in her garden. She decided to fight for her rights. She went to court. It became a 20-year-long legal battle. Feta declined offers of money to withdraw her lawsuit. She finally won. The church will be relocated. It took the European Court of Human Rights to finally rule in Feta's favor in 2019. The illegal building is finally demolished on June the 6th, 2021. Finally, she is able to have her garden free. Orlovic found justice. She says, "Now finally I can sit down and have a cup of coffee in my yard without being chased out." Orlovic's husband was among some 8,000 Bosnian Muslims murdered by Serb forces in Srebrenica in 1995. The Srebrenica massacre is acknowledged internationally as Europe's only genocide since World War II. More than 100,000 Bosnians were murdered in the genocide of Bosnia. Orlovic was among the 1.4 million Bosnian refugees who fled. The United States Embassy in Bosnia and Herzegovina nominated Feta Orlovic for the International Woman of Courage Award.
The number of mosques is growing in the United States. A recent survey says that there has been a 31% growth in U.S. mosques. Let's turn to Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk for more details.
There are 2,769 mosques in the United States now. A survey was organized by the Islamic Society of North America, the Center on Muslim Philanthropy, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, and the Association of Statisticians of American Religious Bodies. This represents a 31% increase from the 2010 count of 2,106 mosques. The number of mosque participants also grew, according to the report. Weekly Friday prayers averaged 410 attendees in 2020. That's a 16% increase over 2010. The report also noted that more mosques were built in suburbs. Mosques in towns as well as small cities are declining. In 2010, 17% of mosques were found in the downtown areas, but in 2020, that figure is down to 6%. This decrease is most probably tied to the decrease of African American mosques.
Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. After the horrific terrorist attack in Canada, what is the way forward? And how can we take tangible measures to curb this menace? To discuss more on this, let's go to Saleha Farouk, who is in conversation with a community leader and attorney, Nawaz Tahir. Over to you, Saleha.
Once again, thank you. Today, we look forward to speaking with Nawaz Tahir, who is an attorney as well as a community leader in London, Ontario. Nawaz, in light of recent events that have occurred in your community, thank you so much for your time and expertise today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau released a series of sentiments as well as statements following the murder of this London-based family just last week. He called the actions of Nathaniel Veltman, their killer, a terrorist attack. When assigning such direct designations to what happened, what can Canadians expect to happen from a legal standpoint, and how does this classify as a terrorist attack?
So I think that it's important to think about the two different elements. One is the political element of leadership, but there's also a prosecutorial element from the police and the authorities. So the police and authorities have their own data gathering process, and they have to reach a conclusion as to whether or not, from a legal perspective, what happened here was a terrorist attack. From a political perspective, though, it's important for our community to hear the Prime Minister call this terrorist act exactly what it was, because it's important to our community that the leaders and the political leadership in our country acknowledged that this was an act of terror perpetrated against the Muslim community.
Thank you so much for that insight. Now, people are also urging that justice and accountability for the brutality of these crimes should include perhaps first-degree murder charges as well as terrorism charges, both of which might carry 25 to life in prison. What is the likelihood of this happening? You touched a little bit upon that, but if you could just go a little bit more in depth for us to understand the legal standpoint or the legal process behind that.
So I think it's important to understand that the police really have to do their job. And what they have told us is that they are in the data gathering process. They have laid 4 first-degree murder charges to account for the deaths of the 4 family members. So those charges have been laid. They are cooperating with the federal police, the RCMP, with respect to a potential terrorism type of charge or charges. But they really need to do their work, gather the necessary evidence, and then make a determination on that. And that is still a work in progress.
Now, people are also wondering, why haven't previous similar Islamophobic crimes in Canada established a sense of precedence against such violent racism? Of course, I'm referring to the 2017 Quebec City massacre that took the lives of 6 Canadian Muslim men, as well as last year's murder of a man that was standing outside a Toronto-based mosque. In your professional opinion, why would this keep happening, and are there mechanisms of prevention in place that might not have worked yet?
Thank you. So, from a professional perspective, my emphasis in my practice is more on civil litigation. So I can't give too much of a criminal perspective. But what I can tell you is that this is one of our asks. One of our pieces of advocacy is that we need to give real teeth to hate crime legislation so that the proper charges can be brought forward, that the police have the tools necessary to put together the proper research to understand why these people are committing these acts, so that those charges can be properly investigated and, if appropriate, properly prosecuted. And that has been one of the things that we've learned from those incidents that you have mentioned, is that our current hate crime laws do not have enough teeth to them and actually handcuff police associations, police divisions from proceeding with those charges and putting together the necessary information to meet the burden of proof.
That's quite fascinating. Thank you so much. I also wanted to ask you, with the recent rejection of such anti-Islamophobic efforts, such as Bill 21 and similar laws that have tried to pass through the House of Commons, what would it take for the federal government to be able to implement any kind of set of precedents opposing anti-Islamic violence, and how would that translate over to such hate legislation in the way that you describe?
One of the things that we asked for when the political leaders attended last night's vigil is that they need to be united in this. They need to put aside partisan politics. They need to put aside political ideologies. This is a war on hate. And in this war on hate, the casualties are starting to pile up. And so we need united leadership from all political parties to confront Islamophobia, to understand that it exists and to make sure that no government, no party is using Islamophobia as a political wedge issue.
Now, I know that you represent the London, Ontario community, so I just wanted to be advantageous about that and ask you from a personal perspective, how are you doing? How is your community doing? And what is the overall impact or sentiment that people are feeling, whether they're Canadian Muslims or just Canadians in general in that community?
So, I mean, I'll start with the London Muslim community. And I think the London Muslim community has been shaken to its core. This was a family that were a regular part of the masjid. They loved being there. They were lovely to be around. They were generous with their time, their energy, their resources. So it is a deep scar in our community right now, and particularly the way this happened. They were just going for an after dinner walk. And so it's going to take some time to heal that scar. That scar is not going to heal overnight. What we have seen from the broader community is incredible support. The London community has really come together, shown their love, shown the support. They've brought flowers to the mosque. They attended the vigil in significant numbers. And it does show and reassure us that the overwhelming population in London is full of goodness, and that goodness will outshine and put a disinfecting light on that small element of hate in our community and society.
From your perspective in the community, I know that there have been a few different ways that the locals have shown up for in support of affected community members, extended members of the Salman family. How has that helped prevailed? How is that support coming through in London?
Well, we see a tremendous amount of support from the London community. And the vigil showed us with the sheer number of people that attended the vigil. It sent a very strong message to the Muslim community that the London community is behind us. And it is that love, that togetherness, that support from the wider community that is going to help our community get through this.
I wanted to really conclude by talking about little Fayaz, their 9-year-old son that is unfortunately battling injuries while hospitalized. Talk to me a little bit about the support that he might be receiving from the wider community, and just to share a little bit about what he might be going through at this time.
You know, this is really the toughest part of this, is to think, and we can say that his physical injuries might heal, but really it's about the psychological scar that is going to be permanently implanted in him. And we think about him at his bedside, wondering why his mother and father are not there to support him as he lies in that hospital bed. And so we as a community have to come together. We have to surround him with as much love as we possibly can, to be there for him, and also to honor his family by making sure that we do everything that we possibly can to make sure that this never happens again.
In the remaining moment or so that we have, I know that you touched upon what we can do from a legal perspective and how legal mechanisms work in terms of justice and accountability. You are a community member in London there. I just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, as a society, what measures can London Canadians, all Canadians, what they can do to address the issue of Islamophobia in the region right now?
So at the vigil last night, we talked about ordinary Canadians, day-to-day Canadians being ambassadors of love. And every ambassador has a different strength that they can bring to this effort. Some will feel comfortable calling out hate when they see it online. Some will be comfortable reporting online hate when they see it. Some will help us build interfaith bridges. So it really is that community piece. Some will help us address some of the root causes of Islamophobia, the ignorance, by helping to educate, by helping to build bridges, by helping to show that there's actually more that makes us same than there is that makes us different. And so we look to everybody else to help us by being those ambassadors of love.
Well said. Nawaz Tahir, an attorney as well as a community leader in London, Ontario. Thank you so much for your courage to speak out and your leadership during this difficult time, Nawaz.
Thank you so much for having me.
Back to the news studio.
Thank you, Saleha and Nawaz Tahir. Before moving on to our next analysis, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Palestinians have been silenced on social media in a digital apartheid. Social media companies are reinforcing Israel's erasure of Palestinians. To discuss this in detail, let's turn to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid in our Chicago studios.
Thank you, Hena. We keep hearing about what is happening in Israel through social media before it becomes a news. But what about if the social media could be controlled? And it has been. And to discuss what is going on is someone who masters on these things. He's executive director of the Arab Center for the Advancement of Social Media. So their focus is on the advancement. And he is Nadeem Nashif. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Nadeem, it is, we came to know and understand a little bit through a video which was so widely shared about the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, in which a Jewish extremist has forcefully entered a Palestinian home, and ladies of the house is asking him to leave, and he's not leaving, saying, if I leave, somebody else will come in. So that's his logic. Now, if that video was not there, many of us would not be able to connect with Sheikh Jarrah and what is happening. And what's the reality of eviction? That there are people who just enter your house, don't refuse to leave. I mean, in America, if somebody does that, you have a right to force that person out. You can shoot that person. It's really legally acceptable in most of the American places. But that came because of the social media. But you are criticizing the social media that the Palestinian perspective was not known. How did that particular video went out through the social media and how it was then reduced sharing?
Yes, so basically, I think despite lots of effort from the Israeli side to silence Palestinian narrative and Palestinian voices, Palestinians and pro-justice, different organizations and individuals are more and more taking part in sharing the Palestinian narrative in different ways. You spoke about this specific video, which was one of the important ones, but obviously there were also many others that were also shared and circulated, and this contributed to have a rise of the Palestinian narrative, something that in the past actually was not, and we were struggling a lot to raise the voice. I think right now, together with different Palestinians from the diaspora and different interested people and Muslims and Arabs who are circulating these videos and these materials, our voice is reaching much more than before.
Okay. So you also say, you're quoted in an article in Al Jazeera, that there was a massive crackdown by Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and social media companies. What is the proof of that crackdown?
Yes, so basically, Israel has been using this strategy to try and to suppress Palestinian narrative. One of them is basically by a clear and public cooperation between the cyber unit, the Israeli cyber unit, and Facebook and the rest of the social media platform. They basically publish press releases saying that they are demanding and requesting from Facebook and the rest of the social media companies to take downs. For takedowns, they declared that in the year 2020 they requested more than 20,000 requests of takedowns, what so-called voluntary takedowns, basically the takedowns that did not even have any kind of due process, were not part of any kind of legal process. There's just these persons and the cyber units who are asking the companies, and the companies are in most of the cases like 90% responding positively. The problem is that this is not the only way. There is also different groups, trolls, and they claim that they are NGOs, but they are actually coordinated and supported by the Israeli government, who also massively and in a coordinated way and jointly reporting Palestinian content, so the companies would take downs. And lastly, there is the issue of that some of the Palestinian political fractions are considered by the American law as terrorist organizations, and that's why lots of the content that is related to them is also being taken down. So these three methods are contributing to the silencing of the Palestinian voice in the social media.
So you're coming to us right now from Haifa live. What is the situation in Haifa? We have heard the people who are Palestinian who are protesting are being arrested in large numbers.
Yes, there's a big campaign for arrest of Palestinians, who are citizens of Israel in what's so-called 48 areas. There were more than 2,000 arrests in this campaign of arrests, and there are more than 200 indictments, and there are even some cases of administrative detention for some of the people. So it's a crackdown by the government that want to make people more afraid and less in acting or taking part in this democratic freedom of expression. So it's mainly to create fear within the people.
There are some people who you know in Haifa who have been arrested?
Yeah, I know in some cases of people who have been arrested. We also have to keep in mind that in the events in May, also there were attacks by mob who were basically settlers organizing through social media with incitement and attacking Arab Palestinian neighborhoods in the mixed cities like Haifa, like Acre, like Jaffa and Lid. And this phenomena also is contributing to the chilling effect.
Okay, so What is the situation in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood right now? Are you able to see that through social media, or social media is still blocking that information?
No, we are able to see the situation there. There was lots of pressure happening on the social media platforms, specifically on Facebook. And I think since then we see that there is less censorship than what we noticed in May. But the reality right now is that there are blockades, and they are trying to prevent from supporters and people who are coming to protest in that neighborhood from entering the neighborhood through checkpoints at the different sides of the neighborhood, preventing the people from pay this or solidarity with the Palestinian residents of Sheikh Jarrah.
So you also say there is a close cooperation between social media companies and the Israeli government. What is that close cooperation? I mean, do they have offices with each other?
No, the cooperation is having understanding that basically to give a priority for the request of the cyber unit. So there is the Israeli cyber unit that is working under the Israeli Ministry of Justice, who get through surveillance from different secret agencies information about Palestinian users. And those requests for takedowns are sent to Facebook in this case, but it could be also to Twitter, to TikTok, and many other social media companies requesting them for either takedowns or closing accounts and pages. And as we said, I mean, as we see also in the practice, that most of these requests are not having any really valid, not legal basis, or not even in the community standards of these platforms, but just simply because they are coming from a governmental side, they take the priority, and in most of the cases are answered positively by the social media network.
You know, early this year, Bethlehem came up with the report calling it a apartheid, and then Human Rights Watch came up with the word apartheid, accusing Israel of the crime against humanity of apartheid. In the social media in Israel, is that word and the term debated? Do people know what Bethlehem is?
Yes, I think especially people who cares about the Palestinian cause. B'Tselem is a well-known Israeli human rights organization that has been around for more than 20 years, documenting the Israeli violations of human rights in annual and monthly reports. And before B'Tselem, also Palestinian human rights organizations like Al-Haq and others have been issuing reports for decades about these violations. Also diagnosing and analyzing Israeli occupation as apartheid situation. Later on, as we said, the Israeli Human Rights B'Tselem said that, and the latest one is Human Rights Watch, the biggest human rights organization, or one of the two biggest human rights organizations globally, similarly saying that this is a case of apartheid. And I think it's important to understand that and to speak about that, because there's a great machine that is trying to make PR for the Israeli side and to say that there is, this is a democratic oasis in the Middle East, etc., which is totally not the case.
So this discussion in the Israeli social media about the word apartheid and why they are saying this is a discussion. Do you think there are people in Israel who agree with these terms? I mean, are there reports and making any difference in the civil society of Israel?
Unfortunately, the trend in the Israeli society is towards the right wing, and in the last 2 decades, is going more and more to the right wing and to places that are not recognizing the rights of the Palestinian people. And maybe this is in the contrary to what's happening to the Jewish community in the US and many other places, where you see the younger generation is much more liberal and more accepting and more critical towards the policies of the Israeli state and government. But on the ground here in Israel, Palestine, I mean, the situation is getting more tense and more right wing, and more seeing less possibility for any kind of political settlements or peaceful talks.
So you're saying the second generation of Jewish people in Israel is not as liberal as second generation or whatever generation of the Jewish children, Jewish families in the United States?
Yes, this is what we notice. We have been in touch with different organizations and movements who are calling for justice and for equality in Israel-Palestine from Jewish communities in Canada and the US. We hardly see this, unfortunately, within the Jewish-Israeli society. And we see more and more machine of brainwashing regarding having this kind of privileges of control, of a strong army, of more violent responses, rather than any kind of peaceful settlement or some kind of recognition that there is another side that also has the same rights as the Jewish Israeli society in this land.
Thank you so much, Nadeem Nashim from Haifa. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid and Nadeem Nashif, for sharing with us these important points about Palestinians being banned on social media. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning into our show. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV and visit our website, muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.